Good evening. I'm Pittsburgh City Councilman Daniel Lavelle,
Councilman Reverend Ricky Burgess.
and we welcome you back to Black Pittsburgh Matters. Black Pittsburgh Matters is a series of virtual town hall meetings affirming a citywide agenda that Black Pittsburgh does indeed matter. Black Pittsburgh Matters mean that Black lives matter. We must protect the health and safety of Black people. It means that Black communities matter. We must rebuild Black communities. And it means that Black wealth matters. We must focus on increasing Black employment and entrepreneurship.
The Black community has been disproportionately affected by concurrent crises, the COVID-19 pandemic and its economic crisis, and then race relations, which is a public health crisis. Normally, in times of crisis and great change, we'd be coming to you as the Black elected officials of Pittsburgh and having meetings across the city with our constituents, partners, and allies. Since we cannot do so safely in the current pandemic, we're now using this media and platform to come to you in the ways we can to talk about what we're doing, discuss policy and legislation concerning Black Pittsburgh. These meetings will be available via Facebook, YouTube, and the city's cable channel. You can contact or ask questions via the Black Pittsburgh Matters Facebook page or email us at blackpghmatters, that's blackpghmatters@gmail.com. And of course, you can message us through our live feed right now. Today's town hall meeting is educational emergency.
Before COVID, there was already an existing racial achievement gap in Pittsburgh public schools. Recently, Councilman Burgess and I introduced a resolution declaring a state of emergency in Pittsburgh and addressing the achievement gap. The achievement gap for African American students is dramatic and concerning. Using PPS as an example, for English at the third grade level, only 38.5% of African American students were proficient compared to 75.7% of white students. In fifth grade English, it's only 31.4% of African American students compared to 74.2% of white students. In eighth grade English, it's 28.7% of African American students compared to 68.7% of white students. Unfortunately, in many respects, it gets worse for math. In math, in third grade, 32.7% of African American students were proficient compared to 63.1% of white students. In fifth grade, 14.8% of African American students compared to 52.7% of white students. And in eighth grade, only 9.3% of African American students were proficient in math compared to 28.8% of white students.
And COVID has only exacerbated the existing problems. And remote learning has been especially hard on Black students. Disproportionately, Black students have essential workers' parents who may be unable to provide educational support at home. Black people have disproportionately been affected by the pandemic health-wise, and Black students have had a particularly difficult time adjusting to online learning. There's a number of students who are simply just not logging in. And Daniel, talk a little bit about your experience with distance learning, having two school-age kids in the public schools.
It's been challenging. For me, the most challenging aspect is, and I differ, and I openly recognize that I differ from many other parents because I'm blessed, right? Both me and my wife are working from home. And so although it's tough for us, as I sit on council meetings and for the most part, she's in her meetings all day, we still have some level of flexibility to get up, make sure our students are actually paying attention, make sure they're getting their work done. But even for us, it's a challenge. At times, our teachers will text me and remind me, Elijah hasn't turned in 2 of his math assignments, right? Because after a certain point, they're still at home. And so they're not taking it as seriously. But the other challenge, at least in my opinion, is it hasn't been challenging enough at all. In many respects, it took a very long time to get our students back up and running when we initially shut down. Once we got back up and running, our students are not doing the same amount of work that they would be doing if they were actually in person, or even in person just half the time. They're not nearly doing that much work. I look at my son's math book. Normally, he would be close to halfway through his second math book this year. Right now, they haven't finished the first math book yet. And so when you think about it, knowing that both my children lost some of their education from their, let's see, first and third grade class that they were in when we shut down. They've now lost some of their learning from their second and fourth grade classes. Having them being caught up to now go into what's that, third and fifth grade is challenging. And so there needs to be a lot of intense work. And again, I say that I'm actually blessed because many parents have had to choose, do I go to work and let my child stay home by themselves? Do I not go to work because I want to focus on my child's education? And many parents that are able to are actually pulling their children out of school. It's interesting, Reverend, if you look at it right now, the city of Pittsburgh is about an average of somewhere around 25% maybe African American students, but we're closer to about 75% of the school board district population, which just speaks to the ability of those that can being able to pull their kids out the system. And even this past Monday, I chimed in to the school board meeting, and there were over 100 speakers speaking about the need to open schools back up, how their children were depressed, how their children weren't learning. They shared pictures of children just falling asleep during Zoom meetings, or as my kids do, laying upside down on the couch. So it's been a challenge for all of us.
One of my fears, my real fears, and that's what's made us in part take up this issue, is that you have African American kids that are already 2, 3 grade levels behind in terms of academic achievement. And now they've lost somewhere close to 2 more years because of the pandemic. You're going to have kids, who are going to maybe never catch up. And if they never catch up, that's going to lead to higher crime, teenage pregnancy, lack of single family households, just a variety of social issues we'll be able to trace back to the lack of learning during the pandemic. Well, that's why we're here to fight for these kids. This evening, we're honored to be joined by experts experienced on this topic. We have James Fogarty, Executive Director of A+ Schools, Wanda Wilson, Equity Advisory Panelist for Pittsburgh Public Schools and Chair of the Advocates for African American Students, Chase Patterson, CEO of the Urban Academy, and Amber Thompson, Representative for Black Women for Better Education and Principal Consultant for Leaders of Change. Welcome all to this evening's town hall.
Thank you all for being here with us. I don't want to spend all our time sort of focusing on what's wrong, because I do want to talk about what we can be doing right, but I think it's important to sort of set the framework. And so I want to start with Ms. Henderson, and I hope I have this correct. You were one of the early advocates, is the term that I'll use, that went to the school district, to my recollection, and said, hey, look, you are not doing enough to educate Black and brown children. What is happening is deplorable. And part of the reason I've come to understand that is because part of what sparked myself and Rev introducing the resolution we did is we knew it was bad, right? But I didn't know how bad it was until I read the PA Human Commission's report that came out at the end of last year that documented that since the lawsuit that you all filed, since having to have oversight, that essentially nothing has changed and nothing has gotten better. And in some respects, our children have slid backwards. So if you may be willing to just give us a few minutes of the history of how we got to the period of oversight, what you all were fighting for, and where things stand now.
Thank you. The Advocates for African American Students were organized back in the 1980s by the late Dr. Barbara Sizemore. At that time, she was a professor at Africana Studies, and she would get the district data and explain to parents, look, your kids are not doing well. Some schools are doing well, but your school is not doing well. So the advocates were organized as a parent group, and we met periodically. We spoke to the board on several occasions to try to address the disparities, but the board never responded. So in 1992, the board also had a superintendent search. At that time, they were looking for a new superintendent, and it was an African-American candidate who was much more qualified than the white candidate that they hired. So based on that and some other reasons, we filed a complaint with the Human Relations Commission on 5 issues: the hiring of a less qualified white candidate as superintendent, the academic achievement gap, the grade distribution for African American students, disparities in the gifted and special ed program, and the disparities in suspensions and discipline. That was filed in 1992. The board fought us for 4 years because they said we did not have standing, so we finally got standing in 1996. It took 2006 before we got an actual consent decree and conciliation. So that was in 2006. We had a 5-year agreement. There was no substantial progress. We entered another 2-year agreement. No substantial progress. We entered another 5-year agreement. And we're at the end of that 5-year agreement now that ended in August 2020. We are now working with the commission based on their 2020 report to have another revised memorandum of understanding for another 5 years to try to do something with the disparities.
So, James, what Councilman Lavelle and I, are we too harsh? Is there really, what do you think? Are we right? Is there an educational achievement gap emergency, a state of educational emergency in Pittsburgh, or are we too critical, do you think?
No, I mean, I guess the issue is if we don't look at the problem or define it well and define it honestly, then we're never going to be able to solve it. Ms. Henderson and the advocates have been at this since the 80s. The basic premise of what they brought in terms of their suit in the 90s still holds, right? Black students are less likely, only 18% of Black students in grades K to 8 are identified as gifted, yet they are over 50% of the population of our school system. If you look at the distribution of students identified as gifted, it's in lower socioeconomic status students don't usually get in, right? So we have a system that and then the benefits of that accrue over time, right? It's like doing sit-ups or eating your vegetables, right? If you get into gifted young, you're able to then access other like higher level courses like APs and others. And the district's made some progress on that. I mean, thanks to the efforts of advocates like Ms. Henderson and others. But the reality is the progress has been too slow. And it continues to be an emergency for our children. Look, if you look at the report that the Gender Commission put out in 2019 that says what the disparities are for Black women in the city, I mean, many of those things can be attributable to the lack of a quality education for those students and families. So the belief gap that we have in our schools is real. And I think, teachers of conscience, administrators, others have all looked at this and said, this isn't working. Now, the question is, how do we fix it? And I will leave that to some of my colleagues here for some answers. I've got some thoughts too, but if we don't call this an emergency, I don't know what an emergency is, right?
Oh, really?
So part of what we've said is that COVID-19 has exacerbated this problem. And I believe that's true. And I think everyone has to openly acknowledge it. Ms. Thompson, I don't remember exactly when you wrote it, but I do remember reading a public source article, I believe you published some time back, where in it you spoke about, and you can give this specifics, I don't recall, but I remember you saying it had been 8 to 10 weeks or something around there, whereby it took that long for the school district to send you any real version of curriculum for your daughter. Can you talk about, as a parent, I'm also a parent of PPS, but can you talk about, as a parent, what you're experiencing within the system and what would you like to see happen?
As a parent, I've been fighting for my daughter's education since preschool with Pittsburgh Public. In that 4 to 10 weeks it took for them to respond, that was a response. That wasn't even to get curriculum. We never really received, my daughter's an IEP because she has a IDD diagnosis and epilepsy diagnosis. So we never received curriculum under her IEP from the March to the end of the year, and she was part of summer school, which was the same issue. She didn't receive her IEP curriculum until August or September, whenever the school year started. What I would like to see is more parent engagement and less silencing, less ignoring. Again, my daughter's part of the Students with Exceptionalities. I think there's a lot of data correlations that we haven't acknowledged in this conversation as the percentage of students that are part of Pittsburgh Public that are Black students. How many of those children have IEPs or have 504 plans, 501 plans? How many, thank you, 504. How many students, how many Black students aren't being supported in those plans? And how many students are being geared towards IEPs versus gifted plans or even fully included and outside of emotional support or alternative regional rooms? So I think there's still, like James saying, we need to define it a little bit better. But also we need to openly engage our community partners, our parents, and community members about how to fix this, because I think there's a lot of resources that are untapped outside of the school district that we could utilize as well.
I've spent a portion of my life, running after school programs. Even though I teach in college, a portion of my students are high school students who are taking college classes every semester. I have a group of high school students. I've been involved in education for probably half of my, in terms of high school and grade school education, half of my educational life has been spent on that. Of course, the other half spent in higher education. One of the reasons we asked for Chase to come on is we believe this problem is not, it's not specific to anyone. I want to say this from the beginning. I don't think this is a public school problem. I don't think this is a city council problem. I don't think this is a Black community problem. I think this is a Pittsburgh problem. And the only way we're going to solve this problem is for all of us to come together, make it the priority, and work together to get these kids to be able to read, write, do math, and speak well. And so, Chase, you've devoted a lot of thought to this. I'm interested, you're real thoughtful about this. What do you think? What are the factors? Why aren't our kids doing better across the board academically in all of our schools?
Well, thank you first, Councilman Lavelle and Councilman Burgess, for the opportunity to be here with you this evening. Let me start by providing some historical context. In preparation for our conversation today, I Googled Black students in Pittsburgh public schools. And what I learned was that the Pittsburgh Public School District was formed in 1835. 1835. And there was a report in 1838 that acknowledged that there were 12 schools in the Pittsburgh public school system. 5 of those schools were for white boys. 5 of those schools were for white girls. 1 of those schools was for Black boys and girls. And 1 of the schools was for infants. So any suggestion that this problem began now or in 1990 is belligerent. This problem began in 1833 when the Pittsburgh Public School District was formed. It intentionally placed Black children in schools that were less supported, less advantaged, and knowingly continued to perpetuate a system where it did not support those schools. And so what I'm going to do tonight, if it's okay with you, is I'm going to speak from 1965. That's what I'm going to do. I'm going to talk as if I were in 1965. And I'm going to answer every question that you have tonight from 1965.
I have a feeling it's going to be the same answers, right?
Reverend Burgess, it's the exact same answers.
Same answer. I think it's going to be the same answer. Yeah, I hear you.
That's the problem, sir, is that we spend so much time talking and talking and talking. And I respect you, brothers, for the state of emergency, but this has been going on since 1835, man. And here we are having the same conversation. So I'm going to talk tonight about teachers' unions and their ridiculous behavior. And let me be clear, when I speak about teachers' unions, I'm not talking about teachers. I'm talking about their union. But this is bizarre that as Black folks, we have to congregate around a subject that we have been disenfranchised and locked out of for over 100 years. And we're still trying to fight to be in a system to do something for us that ain't done for us for all of those years. Now, you're going to have to excuse my language, but I got more and more upset as I read the September 1965 annual report of the Pittsburgh Public School District that talked about segregation, de facto segregation, and desegregation, and how all of that still exists. You know, Councilman Lavelle, you talked about how far behind some of our students are, and that's reality. Well, in 1965, students were reading, Black students, 4.5 to 5 years behind their counterparts in majority white schools in 1965. So the only conversation that we can really have about this is how to blow it up. That's the only real conversation we can have. We cannot blame Hamlet and his administration. We cannot blame the 9 people on the Pittsburgh Public School Board, because this is a problem that has perpetuated for centuries in this city and has negatively impacted Black children and their families. My mother was in high school in middle school in 1965. There were 73,000 students in the Pittsburgh Public Schools then. There are 23,000 now. There's more money, less students. What's the problem? Racism is the problem. Systemic racism is the problem. So I'm done for now. I imagine you've got another question or two for me, but I'll let you go from here.
Well, I mean, I got a whole lot now.
Yeah.
So, okay. So recently, I've been in 2 conversations. One where a former white principal of a successful charter high school said to me essentially what Chase did. He said, "Councilman, what you have to understand is this system was not built to educate Black kids. And until you allow the school to have the freedom to do what's necessary to educate Black children, you're going to have a problem on your hands no matter what." I had a family member who I was complaining to about when I was talking about what was happening in PPS. A family member told me, "You need to go white." I said, "What you talking about?" He said, "You need to go do what the white people do. They figure out ways to supplement the education. They figure out ways to bring in extra tutors to mentor their kids, to work with their kids, knowing that they're not going to get enough out of the system." With that being said, I'm going to stick with you, Chase, but this is a general question. You have Urban Academy, which to the best of my understanding has been open since the school year started back up. Now, part of my ignorance, I don't know if that's what model of hybrid, full, I don't know. But from my understanding, you have a school that is doing better for Black children than most. So talk to me a little bit about, in your opinion, what needs done when you say blow it up so that we can really educate these kids, what needs done. And then after that, it's a general question to Ms. Henderson or whomever else about what we can to quote unquote blow up the system to begin really trying to educate our Black and brown children.
Sure. Thank you. So you're right. We have been in school in a hybrid format, 2 cohorts, A and B. A on Monday and Wednesday, B on Tuesday and Thursday. Friday, we're off for a deep cleaning since the beginning of the school year. Right around the Thanksgiving holiday, as we saw the numbers for COVID continue to increase, we decided to suspend in-person instruction until we return back to school on January 19th of the new year. Let me say first that it was my decision to come back to work. And that decision was supported by our Board of Trustees, and it was supported by our teachers. I called every single teacher every single member of our faculty and staff, from the custodians all the way up to our principal. And I said, listen, there are things we can control and things we cannot. We can control having more than enough PPE in the school. We control having thermometers, making sure everybody is socially distanced. All of these things we can control. What I cannot control is if mom or dad is at home and they got to work, I cannot control their ability to create a safe, quiet space for their student to learn. So we gave our families options, and they elected about 50-50 down the middle. Half came back, half stayed remote. And that's fantastic, because we've been able to deliver top caliber learning experiences from the beginning of the school year. Let me go back in history. In 1932, in the peak of the Great Depression, the Pittsburgh Public School District was at a crossroads. Do we stay open or do we close? Do we continue to deliver instruction or not? And they went to their teachers and they said, what do you all want to do? We don't have money. In 1932, teachers decided to give 10% of their salaries back to the school district so that there would be no disruption in the learning of those students. So now I pose back to you all a question, and I don't mean you all that are here, but to the public. How in 1932, in the midst of a pandemic, in a depression, can men and women who are teaching children take food off of their tables, clothes off of their backs, less heat, less water, so that they can teach, inform, and ensure that the public interest is supported? And here we are in 2021, and the Pittsburgh Federation of Teachers says, we're not coming back until every teacher has a vaccine, is vaccinated. Well, what if every teacher doesn't want a vaccination? So we know that there are teachers that don't want to be vaccinated. So why aren't they back working? Nobody has the answers to this. I know the answer. The answer is that 85% of the teachers are white. 56% of the students are Black. Why will white people make that big of a sacrifice for Black folks? Why? For what? And most of them don't live in the district. So to answer your question, Councilman Lavelle, I apologize, because I've been preparing for this for about a week. Because I've got a son now who goes to my school, which I believe is a Pittsburgh public school. And I want him to understand that what he gets at my school, he should get at every other school. That's teachers who care, who are committed, and who, if they believe they are essential, are going to put their lives on the line to deliver their service, the same way police officers and firemen do, and restaurant workers, and grocery store workers, and baggers, and stockers. But teachers, the developers of the great society, are at home teaching virtually? Can you imagine stocking a grocery store virtually? How would that work?
James, I want you to come in. You're our resident expert on all things public schools, right? This is what you do 24/7. You look at malls across the country. What's missing? What are we missing? And let's be honest tonight. Chase has been extraordinarily transparent, and so kind of help us. What do you think we're missing?
I mean, I think from my perspective, there is this idea around how do we staff and support schools differently if we're doing it wrong, right? I'll give you an example. In the state of Massachusetts, when a school is failing or a district is failing, there is, and we don't really have this here, we only have it for financial reasons, but academically, if it's happening, the State Department of Education comes in, the collective bargaining agreement is put aside, and teachers and staff in that district have to work with the person overseeing. And they've seen tremendous progress, right? Now, Massachusetts does some things differently. They support their state Department of Education with more dollars. That state Department of Education has more expertise and can come in and do some things differently. But they have the power, they're empowered at their state Department of Education to adjust current policy. And that's policy, both state policy and local policy, if it's not serving the interests of children. That's something that should be looked into for the state of Pennsylvania. I think the other thing that's clear to me is, one of the things, and Amber spoke to this earlier, is we have in this city a remarkable opportunity, not to like make short of it, but our students, we spend over $27,000 per pupil in Pittsburgh public schools. Our student teacher ratio is 11-to-1. Average, the average for the country is $16,000 per pupil. Average for the country is 16-to-1. And the median teacher salary is over $90,000 in our district. All good facts, right? All good things that you would say, right? When others are saying teachers aren't paid enough, our schools are too crowded. We have some crowding in some of our schools. That's true. But for the most part, we have this opportunity here to do things differently because we are blessed with a lot of resources. Now, add to that a city that is third per capita in the country for philanthropic dollars being spent. And as someone who comes from the state of California, where we faced Prop 13 growing up, the fact that we have as much resources in our schools here is something that I continue to try and help people understand, because I think a lot of folks think, well, we can't have more resources per child than Fox Chapel. We do. We can't have more resources per child than Mount Lebanon. We do, right? And so those dollars are there. Now, to the point that Councilman Lavelle made around supplementing and additional opportunities that come from families. We know that economic power can buy you tutors, can buy you those resources that give you opportunity and access to learning and background education and knowledge that helps you read, that helps you do better. And so we've got to start thinking, and this is what we've been trying to do at A+ lately, is start thinking about, one, what can we do to drive systems improvement and change, right? Like, we believe there's capacity within the system to improve. And actually, we believe the educators, many of them, are willing to go on that journey. We also believe there needs to be some systemic change at the state so that we can allow for real substantive change, right? Whether it's leveraging models from Massachusetts or Indianapolis, where they've done some things with the Mind Trust, or Denver, where they've done a whole set of things around requests for proposals for new schools, right? So if a school is failing in the city of Denver, teachers in that school or a charter organization can apply to take over that school, right? And they can apply to say, here's how it's going to be different. Here's what we're going to do differently. And Denver's seen growth in those schools for that change. So I think there are innovative models everywhere, and we should interrogate how well they're actually working too, right? The other thing is, one of the things that I continue to believe is we're going to have to work on improving while we're also working on wholesale change, right? Like, you're going to have to start with who you've got and start where we are and get better, right? And doing that means having a real frank conversation about what it means to get better and what it means to take what we know from research and apply it to learning. Those aren't easy conversations to have, but I do think there are a panoply of things we could be doing that would serve Black children in Pittsburgh much better than they're being served now. And we know it. Right. That's the thing. That's the other thing. We know Kappa and Montessori, which are predominantly white schools, are getting more per pupil than Faison, than Lincoln, are predominantly Black schools. We know this, right? Like, it's not. So even in a rich district, we know there are differences in how spending is happening. My children are Montessori children, right? I live 3 blocks away. We send our kids there. But it's almost like a private school education because we've got so many good resources, right? And so when you see that and you see schools struggling without, and part of that is also just we haven't managed through change, right? Chase talks about we were at 73,000 pupils, 50 years ago. We're at 21,000 now, Chase, 21, even with pre-K. And like, but we have 58 school buildings. When you look at other districts of our size, no one has as many buildings. No one has as many buildings. So I'm not saying I know which ones to close. I'm not saying that closing makes sense, but like, we better have a conversation about how resources are distributed too thinly, because that's why we don't have programs in certain schools. You have to have a critical mass of students so you can have a critical mass of teachers to be able to make this work. So I think there's like fundamental conversations that need to happen at the state level, the federal level, but also locally. And they're going to require us really restructuring and rethinking the school system.
I think, and I got to just jump in. I'm sorry, Amber, but please.
Yeah, I got to jump in after Chase.
Okay, just jump on in. I think we're on the same page here. Let me tell you what James is experiencing with his children at the Montessori school is a benefit of racism.
Exactly. Yeah.
That's what James is benefit. It's systemic racism that have allowed a school in Friendship
that was in Homewood. Right?
That was in Homewood.
That was in Homewood. So was Kappa. Right? Like,
yes, a school in Friendship
in Black neighborhoods.
This conversation cannot happen. I mean, you all have already declared racism a public health crisis. This, you're right, because that's what's happening. This is it. It's happened since 1833. People, like, I don't know how else to express the fact that Black children have been disenfranchised in Pittsburgh and across the nation. I'm just speaking about Pittsburgh right now, in the public school system since 1833. And the conversation, and I want to share this is called, in 1965 was the annual report from the Pittsburgh Public Schools, and I'm sure Mrs. Henderson has seen this, the quest for racial equality in the Pittsburgh Public Schools. That's what this was. And there are about 30-something pages here that talk about the quest, which never started. I'm sorry, Amber.
I mean, if we're going to talk about managing change, though, both Reverend Burgess and Chase both, alluded to responsibilities not on the city, not on the school board, not on Hamlet. These things aren't blamed, but we can't manage change if we don't actually have a structure of accountability. The difference between Massachusetts, Colorado, and Friendship is white people. All of our elected officials, all of our school board members, all of Hamlet and everyone else below is accountable to white folks and not Black people. That is where it starts. We can't do anything if we don't identify who is responsible and then hold those people accountable. But whenever we have conversations about these aren't the folks that we're talking about, these aren't the people that we want to highlight. We want to talk about it ambiguously versus like directly. A frank conversation also comes down to who is accountable, who is responsible, who owns this, and who do they own it towards. And in the city of Pittsburgh, racism, that is where it starts. There's no accountability across the board. There's accountability to white people in Massachusetts. There's accountability to white people in Colorado. That's why those folks can get those things. There is no accountability in the state, region, local level to Black people at anywhere in our city council, in our county council, in our school board. Any major voting body does not care about Black people. So until we can have that conversation, I don't think that we can blow anything up. And I'm not speaking from Black Women for a Better Education, but I absolutely do not believe in reforming the school district. I definitely think we should start from somewhere scratch. But we can't do that till we say, okay, we're going to start here. Who's responsible for this? Who's owning this? Now, who are you accountable to? That's what that's what transformation looks like. And we can't do that until we've identified those things.
I'm going to go to Wanda in a minute. I will say that, one of the reasons I've been around, I've been pastoring in Homewood for 37 years now. And so I've been through a lot, and it was born and raised a block from the church. So I've been through a lot of the transition. And so I was around when we, in around 1984-5, changed to by district elections, so that at least Councilman Lavelle and I are directly accountable to Black people. The majority of people in our council districts are Black. And so I am directly, where the body as a whole is not, I do want to just suggest that we are absolutely, my election is due to Black people. And that's why I have fought tirelessly to the best of my ability to provide resources, housing, and now I've always been concerned with education, but now I'm about to move in this area, which is not our natural area of engagement, right? Because there's a separate board and a separate administration. The things are just so bad, I can't, and I've been someone who's been involved almost all my life with teaching kids. I just can't, I have to get involved. Wanda, I guess one of the things I want to ask you is how frustrating, you've been at this longer than any of us at the table. You know, you start off with your kids and now your grandkids, and Chase is right. It's like Groundhog Day, every day, every year.
Every day.
New faces, same problem. How do you keep your fighting spirit up? Tell me.
Because I believe that you have to fight. There's no other choice. If we didn't fight, we wouldn't be where we are today. And for some of you, you think that's horrible. But 20 years ago, this is progress in some cases. And public schools all over the nation were not based for Black kids at all. And every kind of advance that we've had is from community members and parents fighting. And for years, everything has been school reform, school reform, school reform. And school reform is just big business. Everybody's making money on school reform. But if you don't deal with the source, which is racism, white supremacist racism, you're not going to get any changes. So now instead of dealing with school reform, we have to try to undo the systematic racism that's been in this country for 400 years to get some progress. And we have to hold those people accountable, Black, white, blue, green. If they are superintendent, board member, administrative cabinet, union, city officials, state officials, everybody has to be accountable. Parents and community have to be accountable. So some of the things we're trying to do from the Equity Advisory Panel, and we've been pushing this for years. They need to develop an anti-racism course, because we know there's racism, Black and white. And if you don't deal with the issue of racism, you're not going to get any progress. They need to redo their curriculum. Black kids are not seen anywhere in their curriculum, so why are they logging on? So they have to do that. We also asked for a partnership with the Association of Black Psychologists. There's a humongous problem with trauma for all kids, special ed kids, and COVID is now making it worse. So we're trying to get them to partner with some Afrocentric providers to reach African kids and to teach the staff how to intervene and teach kids better. So it's not one thing, it's a multifaceted thing, and you have to hit, it's like a big elephant. You got to get them from the toes, the nose, the trunk, and everything else. But everyone has to be on board and everyone has to be accountable. And you know, you get a lot of flack because you get flack from Black people, you get flack from white people. And the union has to be accountable. How in the world can they say they're not coming back to school until all teachers are vaccinated? And suppose teachers don't want to be vaccinated. And what does that do for the kids? Are they going to say next, kids can't come back to school unless they're vaccinated? Who's going to vaccinate all their kids? So how are the teachers allowed to run the district? Because we as a community allow them to do so. And if we don't continue to stand up and fight this is just going to get worse. So I've been fighting, and I think now that it's become an emergency, it's been going on for decades, but now with social media and we have more groups getting involved, it's becoming more open. Yeah. You see it on social media, you see it in the newspaper. You can't run from it anymore. Before they can run from it, but now it's up in your face and you got to deal with it.
Yeah, that's right.
So, and this is an open question. So I've heard we got to blow it up. And I've heard, but at the same time, while we blow it up, we also must do something for the kids in the system now, right? So my kids are in the system right now. Chase spoke about his son being in the system right now. Ms. Thompson's daughter is in the system right now. In order to help those kids who are in it right now, who is who needs to be held most accountable, sort of from number one, number two, number three, so that we can systematically go about having these conversations from your perspective. And this is from anyone's perspective. As an example, I chose to send my children to PPS because I said if they can get into one or two schools, I'm gonna go into the system because I understand the system. And I know the principal of these one or two schools. I know that they will be looked after. I know they will receive a quality education, and I'm comfortable there. I wasn't comfortable in my home schools. I wasn't comfortable in a lot of other places. If not for there, they would have been in private or maybe in Chases. But I was comfortable with that one point of leadership, right? And as my kids begin to advance to the middle school, I'll have to reevaluate where I see the leadership, where I see the level of education, and what I choose to do with my children. But again, I say that knowingly I'm gifted and able to navigate that. So many of our parents simply cannot navigate that system. So for the benefit of them, while we hopefully blow this up in the long term and figure out a better system that works to educate Black children, in the short term, who do we hold directly accountable for their education?
The superintendent is CEO. He is the head honcho. He has the ultimate responsibility. He answers to the board. So the board members need to know what the superintendent is doing. And if the data that has been put out is a direct reflection on the board and the superintendent, they all have to be accountable. They can't sit there and act like they don't know. That's one of the big problems we have with the equity advisory panel. Board members say, oh, well, we didn't notice. Oh, well, we didn't notice. So we started copying them on everything we did. Then we started inviting them to the EAP meetings. Well, how come you don't know this? Why do we have to have meetings with your people so you can find out what's going on? What are you doing?
Okay, so
You see the kids learning. So what are you doing?
Back up and truly part of my ignorance. How could the Equity Advisory Committee not know this?
We are the equity advisory panel, but the school board district doesn't know. When we have our equity advisory panel meetings, we determine the agenda. We don't work for the district. We're independent. We have our agenda. We invite who we need to invite for specific topics. We invite board members so they know what's going on with equity, since we now have this equity plan that's supposed to be implemented. But when we have our equity advisory panel meetings, our board members are acting like they don't know what's going on. Well, you vote on this stuff, so how don't you know? So it's definitely, miscommunication, uncommunication, no accountability, nobody's watching the store.
James.
Or ignorance is bliss, but go ahead.
Exactly.
James, who's responsible? Who do we hold accountable?
Look, I mean, I think this is part of the system problem, right? The unit of change in this system is actually the school, right? Like if you look at the principal, I mean, to the point that Councilman Lavelle just made, the principal has a significant amount of power to determine how a school runs, right? So if I look at certain schools, some that are neighborhoods, some that are not, and I see the growth that's possible with children that are coming from all over the world, in some cases, that's possible with Black children in this district, and they're doing well in certain schools. What I've started to believe, and it's not to say that I think Ms. Henderson is right on, right? But I think part of the problem is we have a system of governance that has off-year elections where it takes only about 25,000 people out of a city of 300,000 to elect a school board, right? And you can look back, I mean, don't take my word for it. Go look at the election results and see how many people vote in those school board elections and what's the win margin. You're looking at between 2,000 and 3,000 people are voting for the winners of these school board elections each time. There's 9 members, that's 27,000 at the max, right? So the reality is we've got a system that is set up where, the real change can happen from a leader in a building, right? The Wallace Foundation just put out a synthesis of research on the impact of high quality leaders in a building. And the way that they can set up a school for success or failure tells me that we need to do something. And this is where I think there's a hopeful chance, right? Like to the point of like, yes, there's huge problems, but there's also a way to make things better. We can look at what the best principals in this district are doing and making sure those lessons are shared. We do that now in our A+ schools report to the community because we know best practices here. It doesn't, you have to go look far. It's right in our backyard. One, and two, you start to think about it that way, then you can start to learn from schools like Chase's, and you can learn from schools like City Charter High, who are doing innovative and interesting things to provide education for children. And then you can work with principals on a neighborhood by neighborhood basis, because ultimately those communities, the more a community owns a school, right? When I think of community schools, I don't think of we're going to provide all kinds of things for families because, oh, poor families need that. No, community schools is about communities actually owning their schools and having a relationship. I mean, Amber talked about this, being in relationship with families and community organizations, because we're here to help, right? And so I think for me, and this is a shift in my thinking, I think A+ schools for our entire existence, we've been really focused on the board and the school and the superintendent. Last couple of years, we've been thinking really a lot about how do we support leaders in buildings with both the existing resources that exist in our community, but also with best practice research. And how do we raise up those who are doing things right with their teams? Is it perfect? Is it going to be fast? That's a problem, right? This approach isn't fast enough. We have an urgent need for great schools and quality education for kids right now. This approach, one of the challenges I'm having is it takes time. It takes time to build trust with teachers, with leaders. It takes time for them to get to know the community well. So I think from the leadership, from the top standpoint, the thing that could most change quickly the trajectory of our district would be the empowerment, support, and training of principals. And that's not saying they aren't trying, they are, right? I'm not here to denigrate the efforts, but and I'm glad Dr. Lamar is an assistant sup with our elementary students, because I believe she's done great work at Dilworth. So her best practices should be shared. But we've got work to do. And I think this is where city council being involved in this conversation, where our business community being involved in this conversation, community organizations, CDCs, this is where they actually can play a role, because you can wrap your arms around a school, right? Like wrapping your arms around a district can seem really abstract. We can wrap our arms around, and there's only 58 of them, right? Like that's doable considering we have 92 neighborhoods, hundreds of community organizations that exist within our city. So that's my hopeful take on what is clearly an emergency that we need to deal with.
So I want to go to Micah Smith, who has been monitoring questions online, and allow her to ask some. But prior to doing that, I have a quick question for Chase. I think I know the answer, but I'm not 100% certain. Are teachers in the charter schools, are they part of the union?
No.
I didn't think so.
And let me also say that my teachers are embarrassed at how the union has responded during this crisis. My teachers came back and went to work, and they're very disappointed that their work and their reputation is being discredited, not by, and again, I want to classify and qualify what I'm saying. I don't believe that the majority of teachers don't want to come back to work. I believe that the union, which on their website says, Pittsburgh Federation of Teachers, it's all about you, has prioritized the interests of their teachers and the adults above those of students who since 1833 have been blocked out of this system, man. Like I keep going back. I don't know what else to say. It's just crazy. This is crazy. And most Black people are forced to deal with it. By law, you got to send your kids to school. By law. So when your school system is up, where else do you send them? Excuse my language, Reverend. I'm sorry.
So Daniel, the environmental charter school, their teachers are unionized. That charter school has unionized teachers that are environmental charter school. They're unionized. In fact, they are part of the Pennsylvania Federation of Teachers, I think they have a separate representation, but they are unionized. The environmental charter school teachers are part of the teachers union. Just for the record.
Thank you.
I'm a member of a teachers union. I'm an AFT
I'm
member.
curious. James,
How did you vote, Reverend? I need to know. How did you vote for this?
But I'm the college. Remember, I'm a college. My union is the college, not high school.
Okay, so they didn't ask you what your vote was.
Yeah, they didn't ask me, right?
Did they have a vote? That's what I also want to know. Did they ask their members what y'all want to do? Was there actually a vote?
I'm not a public school teacher. I'm a college teacher. My union is community college of Allegheny County. Let's go to Mike, Daniel.
So I think I'm trying to combine them. We have an active session now. I think someone asked how the teachers are allowed to run the district, and then what has been done for the kids before this. Like how has the gap grown?
I can answer. Ms. Henderson, you can, I mean, I know you're looking at some of this data too, but part of the problem that we have right now is that we haven't been given data, up-to-date data on where students are, right? So this week, the State Department of Education, the US Department of Education has put forward a plan to do assessments in the fall. We're supportive of it in the sense that, one, assessments will happen so that we can get a sense of, on a disaggregated basis, where students are. This is in line with national civil rights and immigration rights groups like Ed Trust, like the Urban League, who have also called for some assessments to happen. They're not going to have any stakes, but they will at least provide a data set for us to be able to understand what's happened. We also think it provides pressure on this district and others across the Commonwealth to provide summer school, right? So if you're going to provide, if you're going to test in the fall, then to have a valid test, you would want to have school happening in the summer. I will say, look, I mean, I think to be fair to our teachers who aren't represented here, I will say this: 80% of teachers in an AFT poll said they would want to be back in school, right? So this is the union, the national union's own poll said 80% want to be back in school. 64% of AFT represented teachers are already teaching in some form or other, in person or full-time in person or hybrid. So I mean, while we do have some significant issues around making sure teachers are back safe, there is a I want to be like, at least be fair on that front. Now on the issue of like, why do teachers run schools? I mean, honestly, these are public documents, but hard to read. There's a 200-page collective bargaining agreement which tells you what the rules are around the workforce in the district, in the city schools, right? And the union has the right under the labor laws to negotiate to get whatever work rules they think are necessary for a safe and an orderly workplace, right? And I think part of the issue in that is the way that happens is all behind closed doors. It's the biggest policy document that the district passes every 4 to 5 years, and it happens because the law says it's supposed to happen behind closed doors. So once it's passed, I mean, it's a done deal before it gets passed. Once it's then passed, those rules apply. I mean, this isn't dissimilar to the work rules or the collective bargaining agreements that the city has with police and fire. And so I'm not here to denigrate those. I think, collective rights and union organizing is a very important thing to make sure that workers have safe and good conditions. But I do think when we're talking about children, especially Black and brown children in this district, that we have to have an open and honest conversation about how those work rules, like, continuously and consistently sometimes like accrue to the benefit of white families over Black families. And that we know. And so, like, let's have people of good conscience and good faith come together and say, this isn't working. What can we do to change it?
Just real quick, to your point of assessments, it's my personal opinion that if they're serious about assessing these children and in any way getting them remotely up to speed, the assessment should occur immediately when the normal school year was shut down, so they could then roll over into summer learning so they can get some serious, intense in-person instruction. So hopefully get those kids even remotely halfway caught up to enter into their next grade. But that's my opinion.
I guess I think teachers and staff are just as capable of doing the sort of interim assessments that are necessary, because the summative assessments that happen in the PSSAs, they're not ever really used by teachers to give information. They're supposed to be used to provide policy direction and help us move towards equity, right? Like they don't get them ever in time for them to be used. I think that's another conversation that should be happening right now is what's the state assessment? How can we align state assessment with teacher needs so that they actually can use the information and parents can use the information to advocate for what their families need? Right now, there's a disconnect there. Right. And we need, that's a better, I mean, that's a good, I think I agree with you, Councilman, that we should be having these tests now. But the reality is we need time. I think we should have time so that they're valid to be able to do it. And you couldn't do it now in a valid way that would be proctored consistently across the Commonwealth. So.
Well, if I may, first allow me to apologize. My mother and sister both texted me and said that I needed to simmer down. So
no, you don't. You're fine.
I apologize for my language. However, as I admitted at the beginning of this, I read a report from 1965 that said exactly what we're dealing with right now, right? And so part of what that 1965 report said was that these state tests and assessments are designed for middle-class white kids. Nice. So the idea that we're even being asked to continue to take assessments to evaluate student growth or success, and what's kind of bizarre to me, and this is of no fault of anybody here, but we talk about the success of Black students based on assessments that we all acknowledge are racist. So we say our students are underperforming by this many years, but that's based on assessments that we know are racist. So it's probably already baked in that Black children should be performing beneath that. Right? So let's just get rid of the assessment stuff and just ask, like, how are your kids performing? What is your internal data saying? And any school that doesn't have internal data is failing their children and failing their families, because that data should drive how you deliver instruction for those students independently and collectively, right? So I find myself always perplexed, and we're going to take the PSSAs. We're ready for it. We do well in comparison, but the reality is it's a racist exam,
and so, it's a business. It's a business.
We pay for it. Business. So we're going to do it, and our hope is that it is what it is. You put it in the file cabinet and move on. But the reality is, what I can tell you is that the students who have been coming to the Urban Academy since the beginning of the school year are going to go on to the 5th grade or whatever the next school year is, knowing that they were loved, that they were cared for, that their teachers wanted to be in front of them delivering instruction, that their friends wanted to be around them. That's what, that more than any of these assessments, man, that's what school's about. Because if you let 1965 tell the story, Black folks didn't have nothing to look forward to. But I know for a fact that my family, my grandparents, my cousins, and many of our families succeeded even in a contradiction to what 1965 said they would be capable of doing.
Just connecting this back to the comments, Mr. Patterson, we've gotten several that have said that we should look towards Urban Academy for this model, and there's been a lot of agreement with what you've said. And something that they asked was, how do we fit charter schools into the system? Because they perform well, but the PFT doesn't like how they're funded. But they have different outcomes for Black children, is what has been repeated multiple times in the comments. Do you have thoughts about that?
Well, first of all, charter schools are part of the system. That's number one. That's a misnomer that the PFT and their allies have perpetuated, that charter schools are not part of the system. The Urban Academy is a Pittsburgh public school. It is. We have oversight from the Pittsburgh Public School District, although we have an independent board. If the Pittsburgh Public School District decided to come in tomorrow and shut the Urban Academy down, they could. What I want to say about the Urban Academy that I do not believe is an independent characteristic is that we are bold in how we demonstrate love, care, and compassion for our students, because we don't believe that the numbers that white supremacist society dictate the determination of how successful our children are really matter. We don't believe it. We do it because we have to, because we're part of this system. But I believe fundamentally, that most of the Pittsburgh public schools are led by people who want to lean forward in love, care, and compassion for their students. But the system has disrupted that love, care, and compassion. I believe the same thing about most of the teachers. And so what's happened is, and the question was asked earlier, like, what's the solution here? The solution is government. That's the solution. Government is the solution. Malcolm X said it. White folks and black folks, we're not really the problem. Government perpetuates this divide between us. Government has allowed Homewood, Brushton, the Hill District, Manchester and its surrounding communities, and other Black communities to be depressed and oppressed and government has allowed that. And so as a result, when you look at in 1965, those communities that I just named were the same communities, the exact same communities that we're still dealing with right now. Right now.
So I think.
I'm sorry, Micah, you and I are friends, but I'm getting a little excited here. I apologize.
No, of course. I'm just sorry.
I want to just say I'm going to do a little editorial. I can't help myself. Because I've been on council so long that people now, I'm in my 13th year on council, something like that. A lot of young people, especially young people, only know me from council. They don't really know me from church. Or what they don't know is that I've spent probably 15 years as an educational consultant working with kids. So I was the director of education at the county jail, provided the education for high school inmates at the jail. I was the after school provider for all the Homewood schools. I've ran after school programs and over 15 public schools over the course of about a 15-year career in education. Besides being a certified high school teacher myself, and I spend a lot of times in schools, right, and with kids. I don't talk about it as much, but I've committed my life to kids learning, and have gotten a lot of kids to my college classes, of course, in graduate schools, and have, of course, 4 kids of myself who have done well academically. And there's something I really believe. I believe this down to my toes, and I want to say this because I want to make this clear. Every kid can achieve. Every single kid, Black, brown, white, yellow, every kid can achieve. The kids are not failing. We are failing these kids. These kids have the capacity to do anything they want to academically. We just have to provide a way. That's number one. 2, we have to have high expectations for these children. One of the things is, and I had a few children that were educationally challenged, and I believe this. I have nieces and nephews that are educationally challenged. I never tell them that. I have high expectations for their academic success. Even if they don't know it, I don't tell them about their shortcomings. I focus on their capacity and capabilities. And I'm always encouraging them. And you have to have high expectations. And then the third thing, which may be something that Chase said earlier, and I've talked to a number of former officials in schools, and this is what I believe to my heart. If kids believe that you love them, they will go through walls and mountains for you if they think that you love them. We have to make loving these children. And part of the problem, I think, is because it's both children and disproportionately African-American mothers, this issue does not get the credence it deserves because it's Black children and Black mothers, right? It's easy to ignore that population. If you love these kids and these families and really focus on them, we can get these kids learning out of high school, in the college, in the trade schools, in the military, into higher educational opportunities. Every single kid can achieve if we are committed to it. I just have to say that. All right, Mike, I'm sorry. That's my editorializing for tonight.
And Micah, if I may, Rev, I think you backed the car into the garage, which didn't acknowledge the fact that there's some expectations that need to be placed on the adults. And the teachers need to deliver high quality. The administrators need to deliver high quality. The members of boards, whether it's charter school boards or the traditional Pittsburgh Public School Board, need to deliver high quality. The work that we are doing in education is for the public good. And if we are unable to deliver high quality at all of those levels, then it's not for the public good. It's for special interests. And so I'm sure that's not what you meant, but I didn't want you to, you backed it in, and, you might have missed that.
And high expectations and loving all kids that has not been the status quo for PPS and public schools in general, because they were not for Black kids. So we have to change the mindset and undo the myth that only white kids can excel and not Black kids. All kids can excel, but you have to put that in. You have to make that a mandate. You have to believe and work hard to make sure that all kids can excel. And you have to eliminate that racial superiority complex that's embedded in educational systems in Pittsburgh and other systems, including in the city. And there's some entities in the city that you probably need to look at also, because there's some disparities in some city components that are affecting kids in school, like housing, public housing, affordable housing, the reintegration of neighborhoods. So all that adds into the picture. And I don't want to mention Act 47, but that's something else they've been talking about a lot too. So, but all that comes together.
Thank you. We are running a little short on time. Micah, is there one last pressing question that you have?
Yes, we're very active in this section tonight, but I'm going to try and compress a few into one. I think that it might be helpful to talk a little bit about who has powers sort of over education. What powers does the state have, and how can you advocate at the state level, and what powers does the board have itself? What direction is the best way to advocate, and what can government do now? What is the current vision towards what perhaps you, the councilmen, are doing now with the state of emergency and the legislation you have coming up and the meetings that you're conducting?
Bro, I want to defer to you on the governance and sort of what you all are doing, if that's okay. Because I think you said it earlier, sort of around sort of who runs the city schools and what. But I'm happy to jump in on, what we know in terms of how we've trained folks around the school board. But Amber, do you have thoughts there?
I just want to say follow Black Women for Better Education on Facebook, because we've been sharing all of these answers over the last several months, especially trying to get folks to be empowered and start advocating at a local level, regional, state level. We've been trying to pull our local elected officials in on it. This goes the whole way up to our controllers. And we have influence, and we have leverage that we all need to go with. So yeah, I'll pass that back to you, James.
It's all good. One of the things I want to say, this isn't maybe related, but as white folk, we got a lot of work to do around what culturally responsive education is and means for us as people, right? It shouldn't be the fact that I had to go to Georgetown and take African American history courses and find out about our actual history, right? That should have been taught in my elementary and middle schools. And the fact that it isn't, and it's not standard and mandatory curricula across the board, means that we don't even know our own history as white Americans, as Americans. We don't know our collective history. And we continue to deny that. And then we wonder why white teachers say, I don't see color. Martin Luther King's speech meant I was supposed to be colorblind, or meritocracy is what I'm about, so I'm holding a standard, right? But when we think about the education that's been received across the board for white Americans, it is fundamentally racist. And so we can't have a true conversation. I mean, I'm blessed to have gone to an institution that is running its own truth and reconciliation process right now. The university I went to benefited from the enslavement of Black people and is now making reparations for that by providing free college education for every single descendant that they can find of those that were sold into bondage in the Deep South to pay a debt so that Georgetown can continue to exist. If we don't have a larger conversation about truth and reconciliation that acknowledges our racist history and current existence, then it is hard for people who look like me to understand the systemic issues that we've been talking about tonight. So I say that as someone who understands that I am of a racist society, and I was born into racism, whether I wanted to be or not. The book Caste by Isabel Wilkerson explains this well. I recommend all read it. But we have work to do, white brothers and sisters, around this issue, because it's our issues that are pushing Black and brown families out of economic and educational opportunity. And there is plenty of resources to go around for all of us. And we're better off when our entire community is engaged in the prosperity than just a few of us. So I just didn't want this to go without saying, like, knowing our history means knowing Black history. We shouldn't just know it in February. It needs to be taught every single day, every single month, because it's our collective history. So thank you.
One of the things we realize with the advocates and the EAP is a lot of our parents, not all, but a lot of our parents now have had problems with PPS. So even though their kids are in school, many do not want to come back to school to resurface those old wounds. So it's very difficult getting parents to come unless you have someone that's connected to the community. Unfortunately, our PPS is really not connected to the community. Although they have a parent engagement department, it's not really connected. So that's part of the one of the issues. And one of the things the Equity Advisory Panel is demanding again, and we're going to push it this time, is a mandatory African American history course. You know, all kids should have that. It was done in Philadelphia 10 years ago. Why is Pittsburgh so hard in getting that done? Because everyone needs it. You know, it needs to be something mandated for all kids, so we can eliminate some of these problems going forward. And also, parents to try to come, and community to attend the public hearings and the Washington legislative meetings, the board meetings, and contact your representatives. And I'm glad now to see Black Women for Better Education. They're coming out with a new slate. So now there's some competition for people running for board. So you have to make everybody accountable. Every single person has to be held accountable. And if not, we won't get anywhere.
And I want to add in regards to our elected officials as well, because as a parent who's been advocating for my child and as many children as I can, the public hearings for the school board are BS. Let's be real. I have complained to exhaustion without a single response. And not only from Hamlet, but from the school board members and my local representative. So our other elected officials need to take their platforms like this. This is what I've been working for with our state reps, is taking your resources and adding another feedback loop. We don't have any feedback loops in any part of the city. So when you give criticism or feedback, everyone takes it personally. That's because you've blocked out every type of voice or silence any type of feedback in regards to your work. Our other elected officials could add their own avenues and give platforms like this to say, here's something we're going to take from our constituents to our other elected officials. They can also share their resources with school board members, because this is a volunteer position. Let's be real. When we talk about governance, that means that the school board, the way that it's governed, is also not acceptable as well. They're under-resourced, and Black Women for Better Education is going to support all of our school board members that do get elected to start changing this pattern of just having folks going in there trying to be informed on their own. Also, not only our city council members, but our state representatives, I think collectively working with our school board members instead of separating it, there's an opportunity to share resources across the board to strengthen all local levels of our government. So those are things that I think as constituents, we should be pressuring our elected officials to do. And that's whenever I say, hold these folks accountable, and they're accountable to Black people. This pattern of not creating a pathway to communicate regarding your performance is everywhere in this city. And when we open that pathway, we see how displeased, how under-resourced, or how unsupported Black folks are really in this city. So if you all come together and put your resources together, I think we could have some kind of collective action, and it has to be holistic. It can't just be the school board, right? The city has to address their racism as a crisis and gender equity report to support what's happening in the school board. The county council, the county has to address their economic development plan. So there's a lot that we collectively have to do as well. And I don't think it's fair to just put it on the school board either. But I think there's a whole bunch of resources in other spaces that we could share with our other elected officials.
I do want to commend the Pittsburgh Black elected officials. When the Equity Advisory Panel was trying to work with the Human Relations Commission, who is responsible for monitoring the district, and they did not respond either. So we had to get our politicians in Pennsylvania involved. And because of them, we finally got some response from the Human Relations Commission. But you have to have power to attack those people who think they have power, because otherwise, if they're not held accountable, they won't do anything. And if it wasn't for the Black elected officials, they would still be ignoring me unless I went to Harrisburg, which I did bum rush somebody, but I still needed some backup. So thank you again, because you guys did help with that.
And let me end by saying,
I'm sorry, I don't get to say anything.
go ahead.
Okay. I'm sorry. Hold up, Brother Lavelle. Hold on now.
No, I'm not being rude. I just got a note on
No,
my
I understand. I thought those were closing statements, and I hadn't made any. So, all right.
You made several before.
And those were opening and during statements. This is my closing statement, and I'll read it from page 46 of the September 1965 annual report of the Pittsburgh Public Schools District. As long as there are marked deficiencies in the educational achievement of children in schools in our deprived neighborhoods, those children must have a larger share of the limited tax dollars. So long as there is enough money to do all the things for all the children of the city, we feel we must make the bitter choice to do more for the deprived. We must make the bitter choice to do more for the deprived, even at the expense of those not deprived, if necessary. I apologize, Brother Lavelle. I owe you Johnny Walker Black.
I'll take it. I think I can summarize, because I do need to be brief, and simply saying that, Ms. Thompson, the roadmap you just laid out about how we need to create that shared table, of how we need to create that platform where we can bring all our ideas, all our conversations to the table, is exactly what we were attempting to do. But it was our belief that we first must openly and publicly acknowledge the problem in order to then allow for that table to actually be created. And so we hopefully will have all of you all participating in it. And moving forward, we want to have a series of public conversations We want to have a series of public meetings. We want to bring the PFT to the table. We want to bring our superintendent to the table. We want to create that forum to figure out how we collectively, because I do believe this is a collective problem at this point that we have to solve. It can't just be the school district because they just can't do it. So we all collectively must figure out our lane and how we address it. And the manner in which you laid that out is what we are attempting to do. So I just wanted to reassure you that that is our goals and objectives. With that being said, we are out of time for today. First and foremost, thank you all for coming and participating. Each single one of you is welcome to come back. We want to do a couple more of these where we do invite Pittsburgh Federation. We want to invite some teachers. We want to have an open and honest conversation. And you all are always welcome to come back to this forum any day that you wish. So with that, I want to thank James Fogarty, the Executive Director of A+ Schools, Ms. Wanda Henderson, Equity Advisory Panelist for Pittsburgh Public Schools and Chair of the Advocates for African American Students, Mr. Chase Patterson, CEO of the Urban Academy, and Ms. Amber Thompson, Representative for Black Women for Better Education, and Principal Consultant for Leaders of Change. And I'll just say, in order for us to make a significant investment in the Black community, it's imperative that we work collectively together as we've all attempted to do this evening. I believe we are all committed to rebuilding Black communities in Pittsburgh for Black people with our partners and allies. And collectively, I do feel as if we will make significant change. So thank you all.
I want to thank all of you also for watching and participating in this town hall meeting. Remember, you can watch this show on Facebook, the city's YouTube channel, or the city's cable channel. A new meeting occurs every Wednesday. By working together, united in purpose, we can transform our city, strengthen it for all of its residents. Pittsburgh can only be a city for all when it becomes a city where Black Pittsburgh matters. Good evening, stay safe, and be blessed.